Hi, welcome to today's video. In this video, I'm going to discuss what is the carbon footprint. Now, I'm sure most of you have a sense about what is the carbon footprint or have heard this increasingly in day-to-day conversations and discussions. So, the carbon footprint is the whole total of the greenhouse gas emissions, not only carbon emissions but also emissions of all greenhouse gases associated with a person or a country or a community or a state. So this is the sum total of all emissions associated with a particular person or an industry or a community or a country or a state. So that is what is being said as the total carbon emissions of that particular person, of that particular country, of that particular industry, or of that particular state. Now, for example, if I have to calculate or if I have to say what is my carbon emissions, now that include the kind of emissions that I as an individual have. Now that can come from the mode of transportation that I take, the kind of housing situation that I have where I live, and the kind of emissions that my housing emits. Now this is also part of the kind of food that I eat and the kind of emissions that not only the food production but also the kind of emissions that goes into the production of that particular food. For example, if I am having food which is being imported from certain different countries, now my emissions are also include this emissions for even the transport of that particular food is also included in my emissions. So this is what is emissions in very simple term. Now when emissions of the countries are calculated, which is of course is the huge discussion as far as the UNFCCC processes as well as the COP meetings that happens every year, in the sense that keeping 1.5 or the 2-degree average global temperature, the Paris Agreement target. Now the emissions of countries here is so important, where countries have started to cut down or planning to cut down their emissions massively into something called what is the net zero, which I will speak in a different video in very detail about. So a country's estimate or calculation of carbon footprint is done looking at various industries that that particular country has. Of course, if we talk about certain developed countries, they do have a huge emissions coming from certain energy and power sectors. For example, China do have China is the current highest emitter in that sense, where it has certain definite sectors from which highest carbon emissions are coming from. Now if you talk about India, of course India do also have coal in that sense, highly expanding. Now that is also one of the biggest source of India's carbon emissions. So likewise you have all countries in the world that do have, or their emissions are divided into different categories, into different sectors, and that calculated, that whole is looked at as the total emissions of these particular countries. Of the carbon footprint is very interesting and also quite complex for countries globally. Now, the carbon footprints are different from a country's reported per capita emissions. For example, those reported under United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change (UNFCCC). Now, rather than the greenhouse gas emissions associated with production, carbon footprints focus on the greenhouse gas emissions associated with consumption. Now, they include emissions associated with goods that are imported into a country but are produced elsewhere, and generally take into account emissions associated with international transport and shipping, which is not accounted for in standard national inventories produced according to the Paris Agreement. Now, as a result, a country's carbon footprint can increase even as carbon emissions within its borders decrease. Now, the kind of inequality that exists in terms of carbon emissions between countries, between states, even between individuals is really big. So, the per capita carbon footprint is highest in the United States, according to the Carbon Dioxide Information Analysis Center and the UNDP. In 2004, the average resident of the United States had a per capita carbon footprint of 20.6 metric tons of CO2 equivalent, some 5 to 7 times the global average, so which is of course highest in the world. Now the averages vary greatly around the world, with higher footprints generally found in residents of developed countries. For example, in the same year, which is 2004, France had a per capita carbon footprint of 6 metric tons, whereas Brazil and Tanzania had carbon footprint of 1.8 metric tons of CO2 equivalent, respectively. So you can see here the kind of inequalities that exist. Now, even within this, for example, if we have to take, for example, a billionaire or a millionaire or a rich person in Brazil's Rio, and an indigenous person in the Amazons of Brazil, there will again be stark inequality within this kind of carbon footprint. Now, even within this, you would also see, for example, if an indigenous person or a person of color is likely to have really less carbon equivalent, even in comparison to the general average for the United States. So this is the kind of inequality that exists in terms of carbon footprint. More interested in this, you can do a calculation of the carbon emissions for individuals, for small business, for large business, and for products in this particular website called carbonfootprint.com. Now, carbonfootprint.com is a free space where you can calculate some of these and you can get a sense about the kind of emissions that you or your business or your product has. Now, this is free, so I'm going to just walk you through this. So you go to calculate, and then where you get individual, you get small business, you get large business, you get products. So I'm just going to show you here for individual. So this is also based on countries. So you have to select which country that you live in. And then also here I have just given 12 months for the last 1 year, and then you save that, and then there are various categories of the carbon footprint that comes from an individual. So you have house, you have flights, you have car, you have motorbike, you have bus and rail, you have secondary emissions, and then you get your results here. So once you put your country and the 12 months that you want, and then you move to the first category called house. So here you have various carbon footprints associated with your housing. So you can see here electricity, you have natural gas, heating oil, you have coal, your LPG, and so on. So you here have to enter them, so that you get a total footprint for your household here. And then after that you move to flights. This is the way in which how you add your flights travel. So here it's only 3. Like, of course, there are so many people who travel so many times, even in a month or in a week, so that has to be accounted here. And then you move to your emissions from car and associated emissions here. So you kind of give the mileage that your vehicle has, choose the kind of vehicles that you use, and also the kind of fuel that you use for your car, followed by motorbike, also with your mileage and the kind of vehicle that you use to be added here, where you get a total footprint for your motorbike. And then there is bus and rail, of course. So you have all the details associated with that here. And then you have something called secondary emissions. Now here you have to enter the amount spent for each category below, and then press the estimate button. So you have a range of things here that are associated with the personal or the individual life of a person. You have education, you have insurance, you have hotels, you have furnitures, you have television, you have paper-based products, and so on. And then you get a total of your footprint here. And finally, you get the total carbon footprint of you here based on the world average and country average. So here you see the country average for India is less or smaller or less than the world average, or half the world averages. Now, if I had entered all my details, I would have had a similar feed image here, which shows what is my footprint. So this is an interesting tool that you can use if you're interested. Of course, like I said before, there exists huge inequality in terms of the carbon emissions between countries, between communities, between individuals globally. Now, what is required really is the highest emitting countries as well as the highest emitting institutions, industries, and individuals really reduce their huge emissions so that we have emissions target achieved and the global average temperatures kept under the Paris Agreement, which is so important.